Josh wasn't always an innocent person. He was a good person that did dumb things.
I've cried every day since my brother passed.
How did your brother die?
By fire. He was trapped in a cell.
I started seeing smoke. Everybody started yelling, "Hey, fire, fire, fire."
Nobody's there. Nobody responded.
Where are they?
Did you get a call about that fire?
No, we did not. Something don't add up.
The fire may have happened accidentally, but my brother dying, it was deliberate.
That guy did not have to die.
They just walked away from him.
Do you recall any other fires?
Oh man, a lot of fire. Sparks is shooting
I
out.
thought changes were going to be made.
How did this happen? Again.
Have you gotten any answers to that question?
No.
If nothing's done about it, people are going to keep dying.
A person is getting roasted to death. This is real life stuff. There's a whole different world in here. Nobody deserved to die that way. Nobody.
It's horrifying, among the worst things that I've ever seen. I hope people don't turn away.
Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. It's the state's oldest and some say toughest prison. And what happens inside these walls often stays a secret. That is, unless someone's willing to talk about it.
Now, I'm glad to talk to you about this because I need to talk to somebody.
They messed up here.
They didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Somebody gonna get hurt.
There are hundreds of inmates in this maximum security prison. Some are sentenced to life. For others, this prison is unknowingly a death sentence.
It was Saturday morning, and I woke up to my mother screaming. And it was a scream I never heard before, so I ran downstairs. She was just on the floor. She said, "They killed my baby."
Crystal Devine's brother, Josh, died inside the Indiana State Prison back in 2017.
I've cried every day since my brother passed.
Josh was just 2 years younger than Crystal. They were best friends.
We had a nickname for each other, Twin Face, because we looked so much alike.
Crystal and Josh grew up in this neighborhood on the east side of Indianapolis. She says it was a rough childhood, especially after their dad died. Josh was just 2.
He was small, skinny, scrawny, big teeth with a gap. So he got picked on sometimes, and I was very defensive. We might fight at home and wrestle and do all those things at home, but you didn't mess with my little brother.
Crystal remembers celebrating birthdays and holidays together, swimming with her brother at Ellenberger Park, and their first trip outside Indiana to go visit an aunt in Florida.
We just absolutely loved it. It was like one of the best experiences ever to be able to go to the beach every day.
The good times did not last long. Josh was hungry, so he started stealing food, then robbing people for money. By the time Josh was a teenager, he was constantly in and out of juvenile detention.
Josh wasn't always an innocent person. He was always, he was a good person that did dumb things.
In 2005, Josh pleaded guilty to possession of marijuana. The following year, he was arrested for robbery, and he went to prison. And when Josh got out on parole, he was arrested for another attempted robbery. That was 2012.
That was the last year that he was free.
A Marion County judge sent Josh back to prison, a 16-year sentence. That's how he ended up in Michigan City.
We never lost our bond to each other. We wrote each other a lot. We talked on the phone a lot.
What'd you guys talk about?
What life would be like when he got home. He wanted to start a family. Talked about how we would leave Indiana one day and go live somewhere where we could be at the beach all the time, anytime we wanted to.
Crystal says for her brother, it was more than just a dream.
There was freedom. The water makes you feel free.
But for Josh, there would be no freedom. And there would be no water when he needed it most.
How did your brother die?
By fire. He was trapped in a cell.
April 7th, 2017. Josh was assigned to B Cellhouse up on the top floor. According to an incident report from Indiana State Police, all inmates were locked in their cells for the night when fire was first seen in Josh's cell around 9:35. One of the prison supervisors said flames were shooting out like a fire-breathing dragon.
It sounded like a blowtorch.
Lee Miller lived just one cell over from Josh, up on the 500 range, and he says he'll never forget that night.
I remember. I almost burned up in my cell. The fire came over into my cell. I'm laying on the floor. You got the flames coming around the corner, coming into the top of my cell. I was terrified.
Photos from the state fire marshal show what was left inside cell 540. That right there is the toilet. Next to it is an electrical outlet. And over there, that's Josh's bed. A state police investigator wrote this cell was completely burnt. And by the time guards got Josh out of his cell, so was he.
I actually seen Joshua laying on the range. They pulled him out the cell.
Josh had second and third degree burns covering his entire body. The very next day, Indiana State Prison sent a press release claiming the deadly fire inside Josh's cell was started by Josh. And some prison staff claimed the fire was the result of Josh cooking methamphetamine inside his cell.
I just know it wasn't. He wasn't doing any of those things they tried to say he was.
She's right. Testing of Josh's cell showed no signs of any drugs, and a state fire marshal investigation determined the fire was accidental, probably caused by an electrical event that started around his TV.
It's so crushing.
Crystal cannot stop thinking about the fire.
And I've had nightmares about it, of me trying to save my brother, and I can't never get to him.
And nearly 9 years later, it also still impacts the inmates who witnessed the fire.
It's been with me forever.
The nightmares, and you still hear the screaming.
Sound like a toddler screaming for his mother.
The way he screamed in agony. I mean, a person is getting roasted to death.
And while they're still haunted by what happened, they say what really terrifies them is what did not happen.
Why are they not coming? Where are they?
They chose not to come. They chose. It was a choice.
Did you get a call about that fire?
No, we did not. Something don't add up with these fires.
The fire may have happened accidentally, but my brother dying, it was deliberate.
Nobody deserved to die that way. Nobody.
And it's something the prison does not want to talk about. You're about to see why. Josh Devine burned to death inside his locked prison cell.
I don't understand that. And I don't think I ever will.
Years later, his family and fellow inmates are still trying to process what happened.
None of this make any sense.
I think that could have been prevented.
They messed up here.
You're about to learn what took place the night Josh died. The Indiana Department of Correction has surveillance video which shows exactly what happened. It also has internal investigation reports. But the department won't release any of it, claiming that would jeopardize prison security. So we got details another way. With the help of legal documents, eyewitness interviews, and thousands of pages of internal records, we assembled a detailed timeline that reveals the massive, systemic failures that led to a horrifying death. Within the walls of Indiana State Prison, each inmate is assigned to a specific housing unit. On the day of the fire, B Cellhouse was just about full. The Department of Correction denied our request to go inside the cell house for this investigation. But years ago, our cameras were allowed in. So using those prior visits, historical photographs, and internal prison documents, we created a 3D model of B Cellhouse so you can see inside. There are 230 cells divided between 5 floors. Each floor is referred to as a range, with 23 cells facing the north and 23 facing south. Along the outside edge of each range is a narrow walkway, and that is bordered by a reinforced metal fence. The only way to get up and down between the floors is by stairs at each end of the cell house, and on each floor, locked gates separate the cells and the stairs. Correctional officers must unlock those gates before they or inmates can move from one floor to the next. And each floor has its own separate keys. All of that's important, and we built this model to help you understand where inmates and staff were at the time of the fire. Josh Devine was here in cell 540, and right next door,
Yeah, he was my neighbor.
Lee Miller was in 538. Straight down, in 338, was Michael Gianfano.
He was 2 ranges above me, but I was right below him.
And a little further down from there,
My name's Dustin McGuire.
My name is Oscar Hall.
Dustin was in cell 242, Oscar in 138, and Lee Travis Griffin was up in cell 430. He says all of the inmates on the north side of B Cellhouse could see Josh clearly on the night of the fire.
I can look into his cell, he can look into my cell from the windows.
These windows that line the entire length of B Cellhouse, inmates say they served as a mirror, clearly reflecting exactly what played out on the night Josh died. So here's what happened, according to our interviews with these inmates, as well as the official incident report from the state fire marshal, and thousands of pages of depositions showing what prison staff saw on the night of the fire. There were 3 correctional officers assigned to B Cellhouse on April 7th. One was designated officer in charge, but all of them were new to the prison, averaging less than 6 months on the job. Records show at 9:05 p.m., the officer with the keys to the 500 range, the one marked there in red, she walked past Josh's cell while conducting the nightly inmate count. And according to that officer, Josh said he was doing fine. The count was completed at 9:06, and at that time, all inmates were locked in their cells for the night. At 9:33, all 3 officers were down on the first floor, 2 of them filling out payroll forms in an office, while the officer in charge stayed inside the officer's station on the other side of the range. A minute later, at 9:34, back in Josh's cell, investigation reports say surveillance video showed a large flash of light. Lee Miller could tell something was wrong next door.
I was smelling smoke. I said, "You all right over there?" He said, "You got some water?" I said, "No, everybody locked in. We got some water." He said, "I got a little fire going on."
Others started to notice too.
I smelled the smoke.
I started seeing smoke.
I said, "Did you get that out?" He said, "Man, I can't put it out." That's when I started yelling. We got a fire in 540.
Everybody started hollering, fire on 500.
Hey, fire, fire, fire.
People are yelling fire.
That's just what we do. If people need help, we holler. We make a lot of noise until the guards come. That's how we get their attention.
But despite all the screaming,
Nobody's there.
Nobody responded.
9:36, 9:37, 9:38, and still no correctional officers.
We've been yelling for seemed like eternity. Where you guys at?
And as each second, each minute passes, the fire is growing. By 9:40, 5 minutes after the fire started, surveillance cameras clearly showed both smoke and fire inside the cell, with Josh still locked inside.
I could see him, standing at his bars, and I could see the fires behind him, and then he's yelling, screaming.
And as Josh's screams got louder, inmates say so did theirs.
And I'm like, why ain't no officer coming? I'm sure they hear the whole cell house is yelling by this time.
There was absolutely no way that they couldn't have heard that. I don't care where you're at in that building.
But the two officers working on their timesheets down in the first floor office, they told investigators at that point they didn't hear anything. 9:41, 9:42, 9:43. That's when the officer in charge down in the guard station said he first noticed inmates yelling about the fire. At 9:44, he climbed the front stairs all the way to the top and then made his way down to cell 540, where Josh was pleading for help. The officer said the back of the cell was covered in flames from one end of the wall to the other, with Josh clinging to the bars at the front of the cell, screaming. Lee Miller says what the correctional officer did next is something he'll never forget.
He looked at me, looked at him, and walked and went the other way.
The officer in charge did not let Josh out of his burning cell because, well, he didn't have the right key. He had keys only for cells on the first floor. All the keys for up here on the 5th floor, those were down with one of the other guards down in the office. And all of the fire extinguishers, those were down on the first floor too. So the officer in charge had to use his radio to ask his fellow officers to bring him fire extinguishers and keys. But there was another problem. His radio wasn't working. Now, with precious moments ticking away, the officer headed back down the stairs to yell for help from the other guards. At 9:44, 10 minutes after the fire first started, the two guards working on their timesheets come out to the range after hearing the officer in charge screaming their names. One of the guards ran upstairs to help the officer in charge. She used her radio to call a signal 1071. That's the code for fire, alerting all prison staff in all cell houses all across the prison that there was an emergency. But the other guard, the one with the keys to Josh's cell, she was told to stay by the cell house door down on the first floor to let first responders into the cell house when they arrived. Why the keys to unlock Josh's cell were left downstairs with her? We don't know. About a minute and a half later, at 9:46, supervisors and first responders entered B Cellhouse. One grabbed the keys, another got fire extinguishers from the guard station, and they all ran up to 500 to try to unlock Josh's cell. But by then, 12 minutes after the fire started, it was too late.
When they finally got up there, the man's cell was fully engulfed to the point that it looked like a butane torch.
It looked like the air itself in his cell was on fire. It's something that you would see in a movie, and it was real life.
9:47, 13 minutes after the fire started.
I got on the floor, on my belly.
As Lee Miller tried to hide from the flames that were now shooting into his cell next door.
I was terrified. I just thought I was going to burn up.
The correct keys finally made it up to the top floor. Supervisors arrived at Josh's cell with the keys and fire extinguishers. The cell door was now unlocked, but it would not open enough for Josh to get out. One of the supervisors described Josh's last moments. When he reached out and grabbed the door and tried to push, like I literally watched the skin on his hands peel back because it got so hot. And then he fell to his knees and he died. Stopped talking. There was fire coming out of his mouth. 9:49, 15 minutes after the first signs of trouble, prison staff are trying to put out the fire in Josh's cell. According to a lieutenant, it took them 5 more minutes and several more fire extinguishers before the flames disappeared.
There was no more fire, and he stopped yelling. So I said, oh. And once I saw that the fire had just went black, there was no more fire, and it's just black everywhere, and he stopped yelling, I knew he was dead by then.
Josh was dead, and 20 minutes after the fire started, the emergency was still far from over. 9:56. Inside Indiana State Prison, it's been more than 20 minutes since fire broke out in cell 540. Josh Devine is no longer screaming, and B Cellhouse is filled with choking smoke, with more than 200 inmates still locked in their cells.
The building was so full of smoke that you couldn't see.
You couldn't see nothing.
Couldn't see anything.
It was like black.
I'm coughing up blood, I'm coughing up soot.
I was scared for my own life.
I was thinking I was gonna die because I couldn't get out.
Did you get a call about that fire?
No, we did not.
Jeff Bruder is fire marshal at the Michigan City Fire Department. Station number 1 sits about a half mile, just 2 minutes from the prison.
They make the decision whether they need to call us or not, and if it's a fire that they can handle, they will definitely handle it. If not, then that's when we're called in.
But there was no 911 call from the prison that night. Why did the Indiana State Prison not call for outside help when a prisoner was burning to death inside his cell, when the entire cell house was filled with dangerous smoke? Well, because Indiana State Prison has its own fire station right on site. It sits about 30 steps from B Cellhouse, where inmates were screaming for help. And the prison has its own on-site firefighters, inmates who have the latest training and equipment to fight fires. In fact, one of those firefighters was in B Cellhouse, cell 126, the whole time Josh's cell was on fire.
But they didn't open his door.
He was not released from his cell?
No, he didn't get let out until everybody else did.
Why?
I don't know why. That man knew what to do. And had he been out, I think at the initial, hey, there's a fire up here, Josh would still be alive today.
More inmate firefighters were scattered across other cell houses, all locked in their cells, until 9:45, 10 minutes after the fire started. That's when a prison supervisor ordered their cells to be opened so they could fight the fire. But there were more delays. After firefighters got out of their cells, it took another 3 to 5 minutes for correctional officers to let them leave their cell houses. And then they had to wait several more minutes outside the locked firehouse. All their firefighting gear sat inside, useless, until a supervisor showed up with a key.
I was pissed off. I was mad, because I know if you let us do our job, we'd do our job.
Don Mahone is an inmate, and he was assistant fire chief on the night of the fire. As he entered B Cellhouse, he remembers hitting a thick wall of smoke on the 3rd floor, where inmates were pleading for help.
They were screaming, telling me they can't breathe, help, help, help. So I go back downstairs and I tell them, I say, hey man, we got to get these guys out of the cell.
Don then made his way up to the 500 range. He said communication between the staff and the firefighters was so bad, he had no clue what to expect when he finally made it to Josh's cell, more than 20 minutes after the fire started.
I had no idea nobody was in that cell. I just couldn't fathom that somebody was in there. And if it's somebody in the cell, I always tell them, the first thing to do is get him out of that cell. Don't worry about no fire extinguisher. Get him out that cell. Open that door.
That did not happen, which led not only to Josh's death, but also to a small riot. When staff finally started evacuating the cell house, 25 minutes after inmates first started yelling for help, tempers were short and tensions were high.
Inmates were angry.
Yo, they was real angry, because they felt that he was allowed to get burned up in the cell.
The anger was about that the help didn't come. They had let that man die in that room.
It was way too long. It took way too long.
The response was as if someone had stubbed their toe, as opposed to a man being on fire.
Josh was still alive. Those few moments, if he had brought those keys with him, that man, I wouldn't be here, son. I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
They just walked away from him. They could have saved him then. They just walked away. My brother could be free today. If they had just made the choice to save his life.
The officers' choices on the night of the fire, those aren't the only choices that might have cost Josh his life. Buried deep inside documents and depositions, we discovered other disturbing decisions at the prison have been going on for years.
people dying from human error.
This ain't the first time.
Just ahead, life-threatening problems at the prison that can be traced back more than a century.
And I seen it with my own eyes. I was like, wow.
And the chilling consequences for other inmates that continue even after Josh's death. The fire that killed Josh Devine inside his locked cell, it left inmates shaken.
I mean, it's horrible.
I think about it a lot.
Despite the shock of such a gruesome death, the people who know this prison best say the deadly fire in cell 540 should not have come as a surprise. In fact, the prison's history and its own records suggest such a fire was even predictable, with dangerous conditions building for a very long time. B Cellhouse was built more than 100 years ago, and Indiana State Prison is even older than that. The facility opened in 1860, and it wasn't long before the prison started having trouble with fire. Inside the Indiana State Archives, on these shelves full of history, we found some of the prison's earliest records. And at the State Library, we found all these old annual reports sent directly from the warden to the governor. They show in 1872, a fire resulted in the total destruction of one of the prison's two-story brick buildings. 2 years later, fire broke out in a cell house, destroying the roof and resulting in injuries. And in 1904, the warden described a disastrous fire that burned down the prison's 3 largest factory buildings. These old reports describe fires all across the facility: cell houses, offices, factories, warehouses, the prisoner's bathhouse, all places where inmates lived and worked.
I've been here for 14 and a half years.
These inmates cannot talk about what happened back in the early 1900s.
I've been here since 2011.
But they can talk about what they've seen over the past few decades.
I've been at the Indiana State Prison since 1986.
And they confirm, even today, there is no shortage of fires inside this prison.
Oh man, I've been a lot of fires.
Prison incident reports show many of the fires happen when an inmate accidentally leaves a hot pot plugged in his cell, or when inmates intentionally set fires as a form of protest. They do that by tampering with an outlet in their cell to cause sparks, igniting something flammable which is then thrown out onto the range.
So people find ways to make fire.
It means, over the years, a lot of prison outlets have been damaged.
You know, the sockets like that, sometimes they catch on fire on their own, you know what I mean? I was down the range talking to a guy, and all of a sudden the flames started jumping out of his socket. I was like, what the? And I seen it with my own eyes. I was like, wow.
Other inmates told me it's happened in their cells.
I've seen where sparks is shooting out the outlet.
And it was hissing and shooting fire out.
As soon as you plug it in, sparks shoot out the side of the point of contact.
That was back in 2017, or that's now?
That is back in 17 and still today.
This official incident report shows what he's talking about. It says officers saw large flames accompanied by smoke coming from the electrical socket in a prisoner's cell in B Cellhouse. That happened in cell 440, the cell directly below Josh's, and it happened just months before Josh died in another electrical fire. I also reviewed statements from guards and supervisors who testified they'd seen numerous electrical fires and sparking outlets in inmate cells. And an inmate firefighter said outlet fires are a widespread problem. But despite the history of fires, we discovered the prison repeatedly cut corners and violated its own policy for fire safety. That policy says Indiana State Prison has a plan for evacuating cell houses during a fire emergency. But an officer testified getting to the prison's fire emergency plan was quite difficult because it was kept in the warden's office, where guards can only access it if you come in on your day off to read it. And the officer in charge of B Cellhouse on the night of Josh's death testified he was never trained on how to respond to an emergency or how to evacuate inmates. The policy also requires all staff to participate in regularly scheduled fire drills and to attend on-site training in fire safety. But all 3 guards on duty in B Cellhouse the night Josh died said they couldn't remember participating in a single fire drill before the deadly fire, even though prison policy requires fire drills at least 4 times each year, in every cell house and on every shift. And these fire drill reports also raise questions. They claim full-scale fire drills did occur on every shift in the months leading up to the deadly fire, with hundreds of prisoners evacuated from each cell house so inmates and staff could practice what to do in a real emergency. This report shows a nighttime drill with a full evacuation in B Cellhouse less than 3 weeks before the fire that killed Josh. But despite what's recorded in these reports, the officers assigned to B Cellhouse testified they never saw any fire drill evacuations on the night shift. And this inmate firefighter told us the same thing.
At nighttime, no. They don't let nobody out at nighttime.
So there were fire drills, but no one was released from their cell?
I don't know why. I don't want to speculate, but they didn't do it.
How much good is a fire drill if you're not letting people out of their cells?
You ask the firefighter, I'm gonna say it ain't good, but I ain't in charge. They feel that that's sufficient. I didn't believe it was, but they did.
Instead of actual fire drills, inmate firefighters said guards were given quarterly exams to see if they knew what to do during a fire. The guards in B Cellhouse did not know what to do, according to a firefighter who tested them shortly before the fire in cell 540. The firefighter reported they took it as a joke. They failed. Every one of them failed. As a matter of fact, one of the officers made the statement that if there was a fire, she was going to run out the front door. The lack of knowledge and preparation was exposed when fire broke out in Josh's cell. The prison's inmate fire chief reported all of the officers in B Cellhouse were panicking because they weren't sure on what they had to do.
None of them knew what they was doing.
I think it goes back to the training or the lack thereof.
Didn't seem like the staff was prepared?
Oh, they wasn't. They wasn't ready for that.
And even a few weeks after the fire, when the officer in charge of B Cellhouse took another fire drill exam, he failed again. We got a copy of the exam. It shows a score of poor and says the officer doesn't know anything. And while staff did not get proper training, we discovered the prison did not get proper inspections. Indiana law requires the state fire marshal's office to inspect state prisons every year. But records show at the time of this fire, B Cellhouse had not been inspected by the state fire marshal since 2010, a full 7 years. And the local fire marshal in Michigan City?
Do you conduct fire safety inspections over at the Indiana State Prison?
No.
Why?
State property. I have no jurisdiction there.
He says he's not really allowed in the prison. Well, unless they invite him, which they don't.
No.
So for years, the prison was inspecting itself with questionable results. Just take a look at these fire inspection reports filed by supervisors in the years leading up to the deadly fire. They show B Cellhouse getting high marks for fire safety, a rating of 4 or 5 on every inspection. That means prison staff said the facility met or exceeded standards for its safety equipment, such as fire extinguishers, fire alarms, and its fire sprinkler system. Just one problem.
There's no fire sprinklers in the cell houses.
There are no sprinkler systems in ISP.
And yet, week after week, month after month, year after year, supervisors inspected, rated, and signed off on a cell house sprinkler system that doesn't even exist.
They don't make any sense.
I feel like they don't care.
Confused about how the prison deals with fires and angry about the lack of accountability,
It could have been prevented.
Josh's family decided to fight back with a lawsuit in federal court, and it revealed some surprising new details.
I couldn't believe it.
It's horrifying.
But with new discoveries, would the prison make changes in time to prevent another tragedy?
See, and I keep seeing him laying on that range. I just keep seeing him laying on the range. That guy did not have to die.
After Josh Devine burned to death in his prison cell, it took the Indiana State Prison less than a month to complete an internal investigation. Department of Correction investigators wrote they cannot find any violations of policy or procedure or misconduct by any staff before or during the fire emergency. The investigation was sent to the warden and closed. Josh's family still needed answers.
How did the prison explain things to you and your family?
They just confirmed that he passed away and wouldn't answer any other questions. So honestly, I would really like to see people be held accountable for the actions they don't take.
So in 2018, the family filed a federal lawsuit against the warden, several prison supervisors, and the correctional officers assigned to B Cellhouse. The lawsuit claimed the state workers failed to protect Josh, alleging his wrongful death was the result of negligence and a violation of his rights.
There's absolutely no reason at all that he should have suffered the way he did.
He was not sentenced to death. There's no way that he was supposed to die in prison.
Locke Bowman is one of the attorneys hired to represent Josh.
Literally, he died because staff didn't do their job, hadn't been trained to do their job, and a preventable tragedy happened.
The lawsuit meant all the officers and supervisors who responded to the fire were deposed, required to answer questions under oath. Nearly every one of them praised the response, saying they did everything they could, gave their best, and wouldn't do anything different. Sentiments shared by the warden.
Good morning, men. I'm Ron Neal, superintendent here at the Indiana State Prison.
We obtained this video through an open records request. It shows the warden speaking directly to inmates shortly after Josh died.
Thankfully, B Cellhouse was evacuated quickly.
Insisting there was no negligence, the state attorney general's office vigorously defended the prison and its staff. The state filed legal briefs claiming all the defendants responded appropriately and acted reasonably under the chaotic and high-pressure circumstances. The AG's office argued supervisors took appropriate steps to minimize fire risks, and it said correctional staff took courageous action, performed heroically, and even put their own lives at risk while responding to the fire.
Despite those claims, testimony from some of the prison's own staff painted a much different picture of what happened during the fire.
One of the responding officers testified that panicked staff members in B Cellhouse did not do what they should have done in response to the fire. The officer in charge said he was confused and concerned that his fellow officers did not respond to inmates yelling for help, testifying that those two officers just didn't pay attention to what was going on. And one of those officers admitted, "I felt really horrible because I felt like I didn't do enough." Also, powerful words from the fire chief of the inmate fire brigade. The prison would not let us see the report he wrote immediately after Josh's fire, but it's directly quoted in his deposition. The fire chief wrote, "That poor man sat in his cell screaming for help. The staff's inability to take fire seriously by not getting us out in a timely manner is partially responsible for that man's death." Keep in mind, records show after the fire started in cell 540, it took 8 minutes for a guard to go investigate the problem and 12 minutes to get the right key up to the 5th floor to unlock Josh's cell.
What impact would a delay like that have?
Massive. There's subject in there. You're going to want to get that door open as fast as you can to make sure you could at least give them a chance.
Seconds count. You're a jailer. The first piece of equipment that matters for you is the keys. Not having the keys is a serious failure of responsibility.
So, when the Attorney General's office asked a federal judge to dismiss the case without a trial, the judge issued a very strong opinion, calling some of the Attorney General's arguments unconvincing and even absurd. Chief Judge John DiGiulio wrote, a reasonable jury could find that the correctional officers were deliberately indifferent, based on how much time it took them to respond while inmates were screaming to get their attention. As far as the warden and prison supervisors, the judge said each one of them was aware of an abundant number of safety hazards, including the widespread persistent issues with fires and electrical outlets sparking. The judge took issue with dangerous policies at Indiana State Prison and dangerous lapses in enforcing policy, specifically pointing out some of the problems we've told you about: broken radios, no sprinklers, and no fire drills on the night shift. The judge ruled he would not dismiss the case against the warden and most of the other defendants. The court set a trial date for July 2023, a legal victory for Josh's family.
Those are Josh's ashes.
For the first time, Crystal thought perhaps there might be justice for her brother's death. And even more importantly,
I thought changes were going to be made. I was really hopeful that after what my brother had to experience, that nobody else would have to experience it.
But before Josh's family would get their day in court, it happened again. January 14th, 2023, nearly 6 years since Josh Devine died in his prison cell, and Indiana State Prison still defending itself against claims it failed to prevent a deadly fire inside B Cellhouse. But on this day, the focus is about to shift to A Cellhouse. That's where Michael Smith was assigned to cell 252. That's him walking out of his cell. The Indiana Department of Correction repeatedly denied our request to see this video. We got it instead from Indiana State Police, who were called in to investigate what's about to happen next. And at this point, we want to warn you, it's very difficult to watch. Michael walks back into his cell at 10 a.m. and closes the cell door behind him. We don't know exactly what happened over the next hour or so, because like many inmates, Michael hung a sheet at the front of his cell for privacy. But right around 10:55, behind that sheet, we begin to see an orange glow. And about 30 seconds later, we can more clearly see both fire and smoke inside the cell. Keep in mind, as the fire quickly grows, Michael Smith is locked inside that cell. Within 90 seconds, other inmates come to their cell doors to see what's going on.
Once again, start smelling a little smoke.
One of those inmates was Lee Travis Griffin, who had been transferred to A Cellhouse.
After Joshua Devine, I'm always on edge when it comes to fire.
Lee Travis was in cell 358, just about 30 feet away from that fire, and he could hear Michael yelling for help, at least for a moment.
After he screamed for help and that there's a fire, he ain't saying anything else. Everybody's around him loud enough that you ain't hearing him say anything. Everybody else is pretty much screaming, get him out of there.
2.5 minutes into the fire, Michael Smith tears down the sheet and he tries to shield himself from the fire. And at this point, we're gonna pause. And when we restart the video, we're gonna place a box over part of the cell because what happens next is simply too horrible to show. Just know behind that box, Michael is inside that cell down on the floor fighting for his life as he waits for prison guards to come help him. The first correctional officers arrive roughly 3.5 minutes after the first signs of fire. By then, the cell is an inferno. The two guards bring one fire extinguisher, and it's the wrong kind to fight this type of fire, offering only a weak stream of water. After a few moments, they retreat and run back down the range as the blaze gets even bigger. At 10:59, 4 minutes into this emergency, it appears the locks on some cells are remotely disengaged. A few inmates are able to run away. Others still trapped, including Michael. By the time guards return with another fire extinguisher, more than 4.5 minutes after the fire started, Michael has already been consumed by the flames. About a minute later, an officer is able to pull open the door to cell 252, but the fire is still too hot to get Michael out. A second chemical fire extinguisher, still not enough to fully put out the flames. About 7.5 minutes after the fire started, inmate firefighters arrived to keep battling the fire and to remove Michael's body from his cell.
It's just a box. These are my dad's ashes, and this is how I received him. Just like this. He's in a bag in a black plastic box.
Misty Valencia is Michael Smith's daughter. She says there was no funeral for her father.
When a death like this happens, you don't get that. You don't get that final just, I'm sorry. To show you that it's real.
Did the prison explain what happened?
Not really. It was just a very straightforward, there was a fire in his cell and he didn't get out in time. How does that happen?
Have you gotten any answers to that question?
No.
The Michigan City Fire Marshal also wanted to know what happened, especially after city firefighters went to assist the prison but were turned away. Their dispatch report says Engine 1 crew tried to make entry into the prison. However, ISP staff would not allow any personnel behind the walls.
It seems like it shouldn't happen like that.
The city fire marshal was suspicious.
And I immediately called for the state fire marshal because I felt I didn't want another 2017. I felt the fire needed to be investigated.
Within 2 hours, Jeff Bruder was inside the cell house, right alongside an investigator from the state fire marshal's office. Together, they looked for clues and documented what they saw in cell 252.
What was left inside that cell?
Rubble, charred walls, charred ceiling, no paint. The paint was just burned off the concrete walls. Everything's charred.
The conclusion from investigators, it was an electrical and accidental fire that started underneath the center of the bed. In that area, investigators found lots of evidence: burned up TVs, cell phones, and computers. Also among the rubble, melted wires and what appeared to be a homemade soldering device. Prison staff told investigators other inmates brought Michael their broken electronics because they considered him a handyman. And guards also claimed Michael had gotten in trouble in the past for altering a prison outlet, light fixture, and fan. So was this fire triggered by something Michael did, or something he brought into his cell? Or was it caused by a faulty or damaged outlet, the kind other inmates had described seeing throughout the prison?
The flames start jumping out of his socket.
Sparks is shooting out. Sparks shoot out the side.
Investigators did find this electrical cord from a computer plugged into the outlet in Michael's burned up cell, but determined it's not a conclusive piece of evidence.
Were you able to determine what caused that fire?
No. There's things that we couldn't rule out as far as electrical.
Could have been an electrical fire.
Could have been.
Does the evidence point towards something else that's more likely than that?
No, I don't believe so.
While it's not clear exactly what started this fire, it's pretty easy to see the response was quicker than what happened 6 years earlier in the fire that killed Josh Devine. This time, guards arrived faster. They brought fire extinguishers faster. They radioed for help faster. And inmate firefighters were activated, released, and able to respond faster. And while all of that is significant, when you watch this video,
It's horrifying. it is among the worst things that I've ever seen.
This civil rights attorney says you can still see disturbing similarities between the two deadly fires.
Corrections staff are at the critical moment not physically present. They're not physically there where they need to be. It happens in the Josh Devine fire, it happens again in the Michael Smith fire.
Was the response here not faster?
Fundamentally, the response to this fire was not fast enough. He should have been helped, and he wasn't.
And there are other similarities. Inmates say again, guards did not respond immediately to prisoners' initial screams for help, which wasted valuable time.
You still have no way of getting someone's attention during an emergency. It was quicker than 2017, but just as poor. You still came at a point that the fire couldn't be contained to save this man's life.
And like before, there's also the question of training. While correctional officers remembered to bring a fire extinguisher when they first responded to the cell, they came with a simple water canister, not one of the prison's many chemical fire extinguishers, which are far more effective on a wide variety of fires. It's an important detail included in these quarterly fire drill exams that correctional officers are supposed to be quizzed on several times each year. Also, despite a raging, deadly cell fire 6 years earlier, just like this one, Indiana State Prison still had no fire sprinklers in its cell houses to help save Michael Smith. And those mandatory state fire marshal inspections, the ones that are required every year, we found once again they did not happen. The State Fire Marshal's office inspected all Indiana State Prison cell houses a few months after Josh Devine died in 2017. But records show during the next 5.5 years, they never came back. And even more startling, we discovered the State Fire Marshal failed to inspect the cell houses even after Michael Smith burned to death. We learned that when we asked to see the Fire Marshal's recent inspection reports in the summer of 2024. They told us they didn't have any. No fire inspections completed for those years. Within weeks of our request, the State Fire Marshal resumed its annual inspections that are required by state law. The Fire Marshal's office told us it conducted only 2 of those inspections during the previous 14 years due to an oversight. That's especially troubling based on what the local fire marshal noticed as he walked through a cell house on the day Michael Smith died.
What did you see?
Homemade extension cords, some type of charger, homemade plugs.
Are those fire safety concerns?
Definitely. A spark can start a fire within minutes, seconds.
He was in a place that people are paid to keep him safe, and he wasn't safe.
Misty is well aware her dad and other inmates here were convicted of serious felonies. She says that's no reason to look away from what's happening inside.
These people have families that love them and care about them. I don't agree with the crimes that are committed. But again, he was not sentenced to death, and he certainly wasn't sentenced to be burned.
I couldn't believe it when I heard that it happened again. It's just so heartbreaking, because these are people that are loved. No matter what anybody else thinks, these are people that are loved, and somebody is waiting for them.
The wait for Crystal and for Misty, it's now a wait for change.
We're not going away.
If nothing's done about it, people are going to keep dying.
Next, how Josh's horrible death prompted a historic ending and a new beginning.
How did this happen? Again.
Michael Smith and Josh Devine burned alive, 6 years apart at Indiana State Prison. Their families say both deaths were preventable.
Something happened that shouldn't have happened.
It shouldn't have happened in the first place, but definitely not again.
And their attorney says the prison was slow to take action, even after the first fatal fire.
It opens the prison to the possibility that history is going to repeat itself and there'll be another tragedy.
So, after 2 inmates burned to death in their prison cells, what changes did Indiana State Prison make to prevent it from happening again? Did the prison make any changes to improve fire safety? We've been asking the Indiana Department of Correction those questions for more than a year. A department spokeswoman told me, due to pending litigation, we are not able to do an interview or comment on specifics. The agency did send me what it calls the most current fire prevention practices at the Indiana State Prison. It was last updated more than a decade ago, back in 2013.
Guys, this is an unfortunate tragedy, and it's something that I never want to see repeated here at the state prison.
That is Warden Ron Neal, who runs Indiana State Prison. While the Department of Correction denied our request to interview him, we do have this video showing the warden addressing inmates right after Josh's death. And at that time, he promised changes.
Guys, moving forward, we're looking at several things.
He said the prison would buy a new high-tech fire extinguisher, along with a powerful fan to clear out smoke.
You guys were there, you saw how quickly the smoke built in this situation, so being able to evacuate it is certainly necessary moving forward.
He also announced what's called a prison-wide shakedown, requiring inmates to get rid of excess property, including banned electronics, to reduce the risk of fire in their cells.
Guys, this is not a punitive thing, but this is for your safety. So moving forward, we are going to be going from cell house to cell house, or housing unit to housing unit, and doing a purge.
The warden said that back in 2017, and a purge did happen. But nearly 6 years later, when Michael Smith's cell burned, it was filled with electronics, raising questions about how seriously the prison really is monitoring inmate cells. And while the prison did get 2 foam compression fire extinguishers, the kind the warden promised back in 2017.
This is the newest thing on the market and much more efficient than spraying water on a fire.
It was still just water in that extinguisher that guards showed up with when Michael's cell caught fire in 2023. The new, more powerful fire extinguisher, that didn't arrive on scene until Michael was already dead.
This failure of training was responsible in significant part for Joshua Devine's death, and remarkably, astonishingly, there's no modification of training in the aftermath of Joshua Devine's fire. You see the same problems recurring again and leading to Michael Smith's death.
I know that I can't rely on these people to save me.
Since the deaths, inmates say they haven't seen many changes either.
No, it's the same. Business as usual.
They tell me the only improvements they have noticed, well, in each cell house, fire extinguishers are now located on every floor, not just down in the officer's station. The prison now gives inmates metal boxes to store their property, not cardboard boxes, which are more flammable. And inmate firefighters have all been moved into the same housing unit to improve their response time. It's a change that was long overdue. How long? Wow. Well, take a look at the prison's inspection report from the state fire marshal all the way back in 1918. He wrote, inmate firefighters are housed in different cell houses some distance from the fire station. And he said it's urgently suggested they be housed together, preferably housed at the fire station, to save valuable time in case of a fire at night. That urgent recommendation to house all inmate firefighters together was finally implemented 99 years after the fire marshal wrote this report. It happened right after Josh Devine burned in his cell while waiting for help. One of the supervisors who responded testified, I hate to say it, but something terrible had to happen in order for us to get it right. Whether the prison has gotten things right is still up for debate, because even today, it's missing something critical.
The Indiana Fire Code says that prisons and jails in Indiana shall have sprinkler systems. Why doesn't the Indiana State Prison have a sprinkler system?
I can't comment on that.
Steve Jones is the state fire marshal. He said for legal reasons, he would not answer any questions about the deadly prison fires.
I'll ask it in a more general way. In Indiana right now, what are the safety requirements when it comes to fire suppression systems in jails and prisons?
It would depend on when the building was built.
So let's talk about that. This is when A Cellhouse was built. It's the cell house where Michael died. B Cellhouse, where Josh burned to death, that was built even earlier.
Not a lot of fire codes in 1906.
Exactly.
What code applies to a building that might be well over 100 years old? Where would we go to find that information?
Many times it doesn't exist anymore. Those buildings back in those days, they never met the requirements. And so they stay that way.
The reality is there were no state fire codes at the time buildings like this were built. State archives show it was the 1920s when Indiana passed its first statewide building code. And even though sprinklers were widely available back then, the state's early building codes did not require them in prisons. That didn't happen until decades later.
A new prisoner jail being built today would have to have a fire suppression system?
Yes. Any building that people can't self-evacuate, like a hospital, nursing home, jail, those types of buildings in the most current code require sprinkler systems.
But old prisons like this are exempt from the updated codes. No fire sprinklers required. The state fire marshal said he supported a law Indiana passed 20 years ago, requiring all Indiana nursing homes, no matter how old, to be retrofitted with sprinkler systems. Lawmakers did that to protect the elderly from deadly fires, but they did not extend that same protection to thousands of inmates locked in prison cells.
The prison system is our prison system, and the way it operates is a reflection of our values as a society.
I think there should be sprinklers in any building that holds that many people.
Why wouldn't you have that? It's such a basic thing to have. And when you have so many people, there's so many lives at risk.
After Josh Devine died in 2017, incident reports show at least 200 more fires inside the prison, including some involving electrical outlets. And we're not talking about just little fires. These reports show some fires with flames and smoke pouring out of cells, fires resulting in serious injuries and in death. It's something that keeps inmates awake at night.
You have a spark here, a spark there. It don't take much to ignite a fire, and now I'm in the same situation that Joshua Devine was in.
That man died in his room, just like I think I could die in my room. So I think about it a lot.
I shouldn't have to live in a place where I'm scared to go to sleep because I might not wake up because my cell might catch on fire. That's preventable.
But would a jury agree with that?
Josh's family was ready to take their case to trial. It was scheduled for this federal courtroom in the summer of 2023. Jurors would get to hear all about the delays with the keys and the fire extinguishers and the firefighters. They would get to hear testimony about the lack of training, about missed fire drills, and about the broken radios. And they might get to hear that another inmate had just died the same horrible death. Turns out, a jury never heard a word about any of it.
3 months before the trial was scheduled to begin in federal court, the Attorney General's office offered a settlement. To avoid going to trial, the state agreed to pay Josh's family nearly $4 million.
That is a significant settlement.
One of the largest inmate death settlements the state has ever paid.
Even after the settlement, money doesn't make things go away. I feel like they took my life away from me. Not only my brothers, but they took my life too. Because my brother should be alive. He would be free. he'd be with me. And I don't get that anymore.
The Devine family reluctantly finalized their settlement with the Department of Correction in July of 2023, 4 days before what would have been Josh's scheduled release date. As part of that agreement, the department and all the defendants denied and continue to deny any fault, wrongdoing, or liability for Josh's death.
And that remains disappointing. But having said that, the state didn't pay nearly $4 million to Josh Devine's family because they truly believed that they did nothing wrong.
Do you worry that there will be another Joshua Devine and another Michael Smith?
I do. I feel like it could be any day.
I do. I think about it often. I think about another family getting that call. And it's heartbreaking.
It's why Michael Smith's family has filed a separate federal lawsuit to hold the state accountable and to highlight what Misty calls ongoing dangers inside this old prison.
You can't brush it under the rug. We're not going away. Changes need to be made.
There is another tragedy on the horizon. There's an ability to take steps to prevent it, but if they're not taken, I'm very concerned that history again will repeat itself.
If nothing's done about it, people are going to keep dying.
Crystal is still speaking out, even though she now lives more than 11 hours from the prison where Josh died. After the settlement, she decided to move south, partly to get further away from what still seems like a horrible dream, and partly to keep a promise to her little brother.
I decided that I was going to go live the life that me and Josh talked about, where the sun shines more, where we can go to the beach any day we want to. When I go, I say, brother, we're here. I write his name in the sand. I feel like I have to live life because he didn't get to. And he deserved to be home right now. So I try to live for him.